Testament, and we saw how continually in the Old Testament God was dedicating things in the tabernacle, in the temple. And we saw that these things were dedicated, but they had no choice to be dedicated. And then we looked at ourselves, how we are to be dedicated to God, but we have a free will, and that's where all the problems arise, isn't it, as we know. And so we've been looking at some of these aspects of being dedicated, and we saw that just as life has a running order, God has a running order for us. First of all, we need to surrender our lives to Him. If we don't know Jesus, well, that's where we start. We surrender our lives to Him. Then we submit to His Word. We submit to the Holy Spirit. There's times in the midst of that where we have to sacrifice, and there's things that maybe we have to say, oh, I'm going to say no to that for the purposes of God in my life, or I'm going to say yes to something I don't want to do, like the carpet, for the purposes of God in your life. And so sometimes there's sacrifice. And then we're looking at this little aspect over the next few weeks and have been in serving. And then we want to finish off by realizing that each one of us are on this planet to solve a problem. We are problem solvers. God had a problem in the earth, and you were created to solve that problem. Does that make you valuable? It does indeed. And so we're going to look at those. So last time, we had a little look at serving. It means to perform duties or services for another person or an organization. So that could be God or the church or on the church. But in a more spiritual terminology, to serve means to minister to God in work and worship. And we saw the original word in the Hebrew for work and worship is the same word. And so some people love to sing and screw in the light bulbs and all that sort of stuff, but they don't like the graft. But actually in God's eyes, it's all the same thing. Working for Him and worshiping Him come from the same root. So when we're ripping up the carpet, it's worship. But when we're worshiping, it's work. And so they're interchangeable. It's quite interesting. So whatever we do, and Greek thinking has this separating spiritual and secular, but the Hebrew thinking has actually, they don't separate. We're whole people. We can't separate our lives into these different areas. So whatever we do for God. And Romans 12, we know this so well. I appeal to you, therefore, and beg of you in the mercies, in view of the mercies of God, to make a decisive dedication. This is not just something we waking up one day and stumble into. It's a decisive dedication of your bodies, presenting all your members and faculties as a living sacrifice, wholly devoted, consecrated, and well-pleasing to God, which is your reasonable, rational, intelligent service and spiritual worship. There's that theme flowing into the New Testament as well. And so we've already looked at, well, who are we going to serve? And we saw it was God and people. Firstly, we serve God, and then we serve people. Why should we serve? We looked at that last week. And today we're going to look at, well, what am I to do? What can I do? Because most people, if you ask them what their purpose in life is, what their giftings are, what their destiny is, they struggle with it. And they say, well, what? So they say, well, what am I to do? What can I do? And because we've been trained in a sense, particularly in this country, that the minister does the work, the preacher does the work, and we're just pew fodder. Is that fair? If you've been in church life, sometimes I was brought up in a traditional church setting, and so it was the minister's job to do the work, and we just turned up and paid in. Whereas actually, the people who are the leaders, the fivefold ministry people, their job is to train the saints for the work of the ministry and for the service, and we're all serving together. And so we all have something we can do, and we all have something to do, and we all have something we can do. And so sometimes we make it more complicated than it really is. And I call this the constipated position. And so we get ourselves really head up and in a state trying to work out, well, what's my purpose? Why am I on this earth? We'll have the board at the back says the 2 happiest days in your life are the day you're born and the day you discover the reason why. So people spend 60 years trying to discover the reason they're born and then they die. And so we don't want that. We want to get into the flow of why we were born, why God created us. And so many of us have doubt. Sir, just stay on that one, please. You're a bit trigger happy there. Are you going home for lunch early, Crystal? For goodness sake, give me a chance. You hiding behind that computer now? I think there's a conspiracy here. We're going to tell you this. Before the service, I said to Rachel, how's the battery? She says, there's plenty of battery in the microphone as long as you keep it short. And then they tell me that conspiracy theory, I'm over the top in conspiracy theories. Anyway, we have doubt. We doubt that we have gifts and abilities. Is that fair to say? We think, what could I do? I really don't have any abilities. Sometimes we're so busy with comparison. So we look at someone on the platform, or we look at someone who has really discovered what their calling is, and you think, well, I couldn't do that. I couldn't play a keyboard. I couldn't be a witness on the street. I couldn't make coffee. I couldn't, whatever it happens to be. So we compare ourselves. You see, we're unique. Remember, we looked at the little person a few weeks ago, how we've all these different things that make us us, and then you put that person in this community of all these different things that makes each one of us totally unique. One of, I don't know how many people on the planet, is it 7 billion or whatever it is? No two people the same, not even identical twins. They're not exactly identical. It's just a term that's used. And so we don't have to compare ourselves with anybody else. That is such a freeing thing. The day you realize I don't have to be like my brother, my sister, my dad, my mom, my cousin, the man on the platform, whatever, that's a really freeing thing. So stop comparison. Sometimes we're unaware. Sometimes other people can see that we're overflowing with gifting and ability, and we can't see it because we think, well, I have nothing. And we're going to see that in the scriptures as we go through this. So we're unaware of what God has placed within us. And sometimes it's fear. Sometimes we think, I know God's anointed me. I know God has put something within me, but what if I let him down? What if I try to do it and I look stupid? I remember the first time I gave my testimony, I had to give it in the old, where it's Lisburn Square now. It was the old swimming pool. Anybody old enough to remember that? And so I had to give my testimony on a Sunday night. And then the second time I got to give my testimony was in Malile Borstal. It's called something more grand. It's called Hyde Bank, helping young people get better place now, whatever it's called, but it was a Borstal in those days. And so that's probably not politically correct terminology now, but when you're 18 and you're in with those guys, that's a bit of a challenge, isn't it? So it's easy to be fearful. But I had made a decision as a young man that whatever God asked me to do, I would do it. Whether I felt I had the ability to do it or whether I made a fool of myself or not. And I tell you, that was the best thing I ever did. And so sometimes we just need to be afraid and do it anyway, as it Joyce Meyer says that. And so you can move on now, Crystal. Thanks. So sometimes then we have all these things and then we think, oh, which one should I do? You know, sometimes I talked over the years. I'm 61, 62 this year. I've been saved since I was 12. I've been in church a long time. And so I've seen people who actually haven't served God because they couldn't make their mind up. Oh, well, I don't know whether to work with children or be in the coffee team or be in the car park team or be a preacher or be a missionary to China or just blooming well do one of them, for goodness sake. Start with one because you'll soon find if it's... John Heenan's not here today, I don't think, but, you know, we know John Heenan doesn't like children. You wouldn't even let him near the children. So we can rule that one out. But there's other gifts that he has, but at least start somewhere. You know, it might be with the coffee, it may be in the children's work, it may be on a Tuesday night, whatever. And so here's 3 people here. And so sometimes we do have to ask the questions, well, what can I do? What abilities do I have? We need to ask those questions. And then we need to get the gray matter working. We need to get our mind thinking. And then sometimes we actually need to renew our minds. What did we read in Romans 12? Renewing our minds. Because if somebody has told us in school we're stupid, that's a heavy chain to be hanging around your neck, isn't it? And so people have said things to us, you'll never do that, you'll never be successful. You hear some of the most successful people in the world tell when they were at school, I heard somebody recently, I can't remember who it was, but somebody who was very, very successful recently, and their careers teacher told them they should be a clown because they wouldn't be any good at anything else. And you think, wow, that's unbelievable, isn't it? And so, yeah, we do need to think it through. We need to maybe ask questions. But if we do, if we have the information that we need, then we'll have a revelation. We'll have a light bulb moment where we think, well, actually, I could do that. Actually, I have that ability. And so we're going to look at a few people in Scripture who didn't think they were particularly good at anything, but actually they discovered that they had abilities and that God could do things through them. Funny thing is, I was just getting ready for bed on Friday evening, and I got this message in 5 minutes. And it's got 4 W's. And, well, it's all W's, but it's got 4 H's and 4 P's. That's my Presbyterian upbringing. And you're impressed with that? So you'll see as we go along. And this, I was getting ready. I said to Mary, I can't go to bed. I'm going to have to write this down in my notes. And I wrote the basis of it down, some questions you're going to look at, and then I spent 6 hours the next day making it, putting it together. And so, but this is something I think will help us this morning. So Moses, we know Moses. God said to Moses, "What have you got in your hand?" Moses said, "It's a shepherd's staff." Then the Lord asked him, "What is that in your hand?" "A shepherd's staff," Moses replied. Basically a stick. He had a stick in his hand. Just go on to the next one, please. And so he was in the wilderness. He was looking after the sheep. He had his stick or his shepherd's staff for just keeping them in order. And God said, "What have you got in your hand?" You see, what we've got in our hand is generally our purpose. So if you're talking to a tradesman, what's he got in his hand? Well, he's got a drill, or he's got a saw, or he's got something that are the tools of his trade. If you're a baker, what have you got in your hand? You've got a whisk, or you've got flour, or if you have a coffee shop, you've got coffee beans in your hand. If you're an IT person, you've got an iPad or a computer. What have you got in your hand? Because generally what you've got in your hand is your purpose. Is that fair? If you're an accountant, you maybe used to have a pencil, but now you've got a keyboard. And so what you've got in your hand generally is your purpose. And so it may be your purpose in everyday life, if you want to use that terminology, but there's aspects of that may carry over into what we do in church or what we do in ministry, what we do in other. We're not one-dimensional people. We're multi-dimensional. But generally, the gifts that you have in one area will translate into other areas. Isn't that right? And so if you're good, if you use a computer in work, well, then you can send an email, can't you? You don't have to send just work emails. You can send an email to your friends. If you have any friends. And so all these things are things that speak. When God says, "What have you got in your hand?" He's trying to get us to think. He's trying to get Moses to think. And Moses said, "Well, I have a stick. I have a staff." The amazing thing is, if you take time to read the story, it said that this was Moses' staff. When you go to the end of the story, Moses' staff is called the rod of God. So that was the rod that he lifted to separate the sea. That was the rod that he struck the rock with that the water come out. That was the rod that he used. He threw it down on the ground, turned into a snake. God said, "Pick it up by the tail." You never do this at home. Don't pick a snake up by the tail. But God was wanting to show him something. And so sometimes we have to lay our purpose down. Sometimes we have to say, "God, I'm just not only going to use this ability, this purpose for me, but I'm going to use it for the kingdom." I lay it down because when you pick it up, then it'll be something different. It'll be something that will have authority. It won't just be Jenny's whisk. It'll be God's whisk, because you'll bake buns that you'll pray over and you'll give to your neighbors and they'll get saved. Random example, but whatever. So we need to say, "God, yeah, I understand maybe my purpose in a natural sense, but how can then I develop that in my ministry and my serving of you?" Maybe in what we call our work is where God has called us to serve. and we should be serving in that environment. So, but sometimes we need to lay it down and give it to God before he can really multiply it. Here's the interesting thing about Moses. Moses didn't discover his purpose until he was 80. God spoke to him out of a burning bush, and then he gave him his mandate, told him what to do. So was the first 80 years of his life wasted? No. What was it? It was training. It was testing. It was preparing. It was getting him ready, because all the things that he had walked through, all the things that he had done, all the things that he had learned with the sheep in the wilderness for 40 years, now he was going to have to bring God's sheep through the wilderness for another 40 years, the children of Israel. And the Bible says they were just like sheep. So God had been training him. And so if you're 80 today, or if you're 60, or you're 40, or whatever, and you think, well, I actually really don't know what my purpose is yet. Here's the good news. If you haven't discovered what it is yet, God's been training you to get you to this point. So nothing has been wasted. I'm going to get Lindsay to share next week just about some of the things that she has done in her life that were all a bit random, but actually they're perfect for what's happening now. And so you'll see the progression of this. And so we need to realize, okay, my life's getting on a bit. Maybe I haven't discovered my purpose, but at least God's been training me and preparing me. So do not be disappointed if you're not 100% sure what God's purpose is for your life. Number 2 in this, it says, what have you got in your house? The prophet came to the widow woman. The guys were going to come and take her children away because she hadn't any money. And so in those days, your children were taken into slavery so that they could pay off your debt. And so the prophet came and he said to this widow woman, what can I do to help you? Elisha asked. Tell me, what do you have in your house? Look what she says, nothing at all. How many people, if I was to ask each person here, which I don't have time to do now, you'll be glad to hear, but if I was to ask each one of you, what do you have in your life? Because we're the temple, we're the house of God, isn't that right? Corporately, we're God's house, but individually, we're God's house, where the Holy Spirit lives within us. We're the temple of the Holy Spirit, we're the house of God. So if I said, what do you have in your house to serve God? I really can't do anything. Left school when I was 16, not the sharpest tool in the box. I'm not saying that. That's maybe your opinion of yourself. But we say those things, don't we? Or is that just me? And so she says, nothing at all, except, that was a lifesaver there, wasn't it? Never stop at nothing at all. Go to the dregs of your life at least and pull something out. She said, for goodness sake, I've nothing at all except a flask of olive oil. Wow, that was a life-saving statement there. So when God comes to you today, when I come to you through this message, say, what have you got in your house? You might say initially, nothing at all, but begin to think and then say, except, well, I can do this, I could do that, I could give this, I could step into that situation. Powerful. You see, this woman had just this little flask of oil, but it actually, as she poured it out, you see, what did Moses do? He threw it down. He laid it down. She had to pour it out. You see, while you're sitting trying to work it out, you're never going to discover it. There's a movement in the purpose of God. There always has to be action. There always has to be a movement. There always has to be something that we do. If you sit in that chair trying to find out what your purpose is, you'll sit till you die. But if you will make a move and say, I don't know what my purpose is, but I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to serve in the coffee team in the meantime. I'm going to visit my neighbor and see if I can help him in the meantime. I'm going to turn up to work on time and don't leave early. That'll be a good witness, wouldn't it? Whatever it happens to be, if that's for you, you put your cap on and wear it. But you see, we can be serving wherever we are. I'm going to start paying my taxes. I'm going to pay my VAT. Going to do this. I'm going to listen. Start with something simple, something you can do. But as you pour it out, as you take an action, as you lay down the rod, as you pour out the flask, you're going to find that God's going to pour in. And you're going to find, the prophet said, go and get all the containers you can, because as you keep pouring, they're going to be filled. You see, the woman ran out of containers. I asked myself the question, if they could have kept bringing containers and she had been able to live forever, would she still have been pouring? If she had handed that on to her son, that could have been some business, couldn't it? That would have been an amazing business where you have very little cost and pretty much all profit. Because all you need is containers and somebody that can keep pouring. And as we keep pouring, God will keep using us, God will keep supplying. But when we stop pouring, then the oil stops. Amazing. So what have you got in your hand? What have you got in your house? Another question, what have you got in your heart? So the last one, the P was your provision. So it becomes our provision, just to finish in that one. So when we begin to pour out, when we begin to see what we have in our house, the provision comes to do more of what God's asking us to do. You think, well, when I tell you next week, I'm going to speak on whatever next week's is, the how, I don't have that written down in a book somewhere. I don't know what I'm going to say next time we're speaking. But when I come to sit down to prepare for it, as I pour out, God pours in. So all I start with is a title, and we've been at it now 8 weeks. You think, 8 weeks too long, and another flipping 8 weeks to go. Could you not condense it a bit? But I want us to get this. And so it's amazing as we begin to pour out, as we begin to lay down, then God gives us, He provides for us. You think, well, I actually haven't the finances to be able to help. Well, try starting. You could be surprised how God sends the provision for you to be able to do. I haven't got the time. It'd be amazing how God could provide the time if we sow time. And so, this next one, what have you got in your heart? That's our passion. You see, we need to be passionate for what we do and what we want to do. Otherwise, we'll run out of steam. People who don't have passion run out of steam when they're serving, or they get bitter, or they get fed up and think, well, she's not serving and I'm serving. I ripped up 4 bits of carpet and he didn't. He ripped up 2. No, if we have a passion for whatever it is, we don't even see what other people are doing. We're busy doing what God's calling us to do. And so Jesus said this, it is as impossible for a good tree to produce bad fruit as it is for a bad tree to produce good fruit. People know what a tree is by its fruit. You cannot pick figs from briars or grapes from a blackberry bush. A good man produces good things from the good stored up in his heart. A bad man produces evil things from his own stores of evil. For a man or woman's words will always express what has been treasured in his heart. And so if God has given us treasure in earthen vessels in this house, if we have realized now, hold on, we do have something in here. If we have a passion for that, we'll talk about it. And so we need to listen to ourselves sometimes. Maybe other people will listen to us. If you're continually talking about children's work or babies or wherever it is, there's a good chance that's your calling, that's your purpose. If you're talking about human trafficking victims, or you're someone who always is looking at injustice and saying, I need to be doing something there, and talking about, look at the news, did you see the news? Isn't that an injustice? Well, just don't sit back and do nothing about it. That's your voice expressing the passion of your heart. And so that 9 times out of 10 will be something to do with your purpose and your destiny. Just don't say, well, that's somebody else's job. We tend to do that. We see it, we speak it, but we don't follow through on it. And that's the problem with not following through. And so listen to what you're saying, because God has made us good. We're not good by ourselves. We've been made the righteousness of God in Christ Jesus. Isn't that right? So the good things from the good heart of the child of God should be seeing the things that God has a heart for. Is that right? And so it will not be different not be the same for all of us, but it will be something that if we listen to ourselves, we will begin to see, well, this is what's in my heart. This is actually my passion. This will help me have some direction in where I want to go. Could be worship for some of you. Worship could be your passion. Well, then maybe you need to be speaking to Andy. For some of you, it could be sound or whatever it is. Did you know your heart health is connected to your oral health? Just saw this in Google. I thought it was a good little example. And so from the abundance of the heart, the mouth will speak. Whatever is in our heart will come out. If it's negative, it will come out. If it's good, it'll come out. But sometimes if we listen to ourselves, we'll see what our passion really is. And then just the fourth little one, before we look at a couple of questions. What have you got in your head? You see, that's your plan. You see, it's great to have passion, isn't it? It's great to understand these things. What have I got in my hand? What have I got in my heart? What's your passion? But if you don't have a plan to do it, so God spoke to me 20 years ago about planting the church here. I had a passion for it. I still needed a plan, didn't I? Otherwise, we wouldn't be here 20 years later. We have a plan now to make this room bigger so we can have more people in church and make more space for new folk that we're believing God's going to save and bring in and help. And so we're preparing for that. We have a plan for that. And so what have you got in your head? This example is a great example. We know it well, Nehemiah. So we built the wall, and all of it was joined together to half its height. For the people had a heart, they had a passion, but they also had a mind to work. Nehemiah had a plan, and they got the wall built in a very short space of time. It was quite incredible. The people were amazed. In spite of opposition, they had to build a wall and have a sword in one hand and a trowel in the other because the people who were trying to stop them building the wall. So in spite of all the opposition, was it 56 days they built the wall? Does anybody remember? But it was a short space of time. Because they had a plan, they not only had a heart to work, but they had a mind. It was in their head. They thought it through. They intelligently looked at it. They said, okay, we can do this. Yes, we have a heart to do it, but we have a plan. We have a mind to do it. What have you got in your head? Your mind's in your head, in case you're wondering how those two connect. And so that's our plan. So here's some questions just as we finish. And this will help us maybe discover what our purpose is, how we can serve. What are you good at doing? Pastor, that's too simple. Now, these have to be righteous things also. Let me just preface it with that. What are you good at doing? Well, if you're good at playing the keyboard, you're good at helping people, you're good with hospitality, you're good. There's 1,001 things you could be good at. What are you good at doing? Because generally, if you're good at doing something, that's going to flow into where your service is, where your purpose is. So what are you good at doing? What do you like doing? Well, God wouldn't make it that easy. Surely serving God's going to be something that I hate. No. Duh. It's very hard to do something you hate doing, isn't it? Sometimes we have to wade our way through some stuff. I get that. But do you ever notice if you have 20 things to do, most people do the thing they hate doing last? Was that right? Or is that just Stephen? Where's Stephen? He away out? But we're all like that, aren't we? So now some people have really disciplined themselves, and then they do the thing they hate doing first. You ever do that when you see somebody eating their dinner and they eat something first, like Lindsay and Brussels sprouts? She doesn't eat them at all, but anyway. But sometimes people have disciplined themselves in the thing they hate doing. They do it first to get it out of the way so that they can get doing the things they love doing. But actually, God, when we find our passion, it's not hard to do it's not hard for a Liverpool supporter to support Liverpool, is it? Because that's their passion. That's something they like doing. It's hard for them to be a Manchester United supporter because that's not something they like doing. See, they're very good at supporting Liverpool, and they like doing it. But don't ask them to support Manchester United because they're the enemy. And this is the grace of God that Andy and I are in the same team. So what are we good at doing? What do you like doing? Here's a good one. What do others say you're good at? Because we're so self-effacing many times. You know, we say, somebody say, oh, you're really good at that. You know, it's like somebody said to somebody famous a number of years ago, and I'm sure it's happened more than once, you know, that was really fantastic keyboard playing when you were leading worship. So, well, it wasn't me, it was just the Lord. And the person said to him, well, I saw your fingers moving. And, you know, so we're so blooming sanctimonious at times. And so God doesn't come and magically move your fingers. You have to move them. He can anoint it. He can bless it. He can take it. He can grow it. But it's our gift that he's given us to do. It's our ability. It's our talent. So what do others say you're good at? When people say you're good at something, don't keep arguing with them. Just say, well, thank you. You know, well, we don't want to be proud. Well, it's an inverted pride. Because you know rightly you're good at it. So just say, well, thank you. I need to develop that ability then. I need to upskill that ability. So sometimes ask. It's good to ask a friend that you can trust, not somebody that's jealous of you. Never ask somebody that's jealous of you these questions, but somebody you know, somebody that's a friend, someone you can trust, someone that's in that space in your life. Say, what do you think I'm good at? What do you think my gifting would be? Because you'll get great insights there if that's truly your friend. What are your gifts, talents, skills, and ability? They may seem totally random, and you might think, how could you serve God with these gifts? Well, we'll hear that next week when Lindsay gives her testimony. But we've all got different giftings. We've all got different talents. We've got different skills. We've got different abilities at different levels. Let's start using them. Let's begin to say, well, what has God given me and how can I use that? What comes easy to you? Well, again, we think, oh, what comes easy to me? This comes easy to me. If there was 10,000 people in this room, it would be a fire hazard and we'd be getting shut down. But if I was standing before 10,000 people, I would be totally at ease on the platform. But ask me to go into a room of 3 strangers. That was difficult for me because I'm actually quite shy. I'm happy with my own company. Mary keeps inviting the family around every week and think, for goodness sake. I love you all. I'm sharing a house with 3 blondes. Going to say dumb blondes, but that would be... When Mary was in the hospital, she had the operation on the Thursday, and Thursday morning, I went down the Thursday. And so my son said, how was Mum? I said, she was dopier than usual. Stephen said, I wouldn't tell her that till next week. But what comes easy to us? So for you to stand up here might totally freak you out. But you may be a total natural in with people on a one-to-one. My dad was a great one-to-one person. But if you put him on this platform, he couldn't string 2 words together. And he was a man of God, a man of prayer. If you ask him to come up here and pray, he would just stumble over it. Think, what was that all about? But you see, put him on a one-to-one and put him in a group with people, he was totally amazing. And so don't compare yourself. Remember we said that. You find out what comes easy to you because there's a good chance God will use that in his purpose and his ministry in your life. What do you talk, imagine, and daydream about? We all talk about stuff. We all imagine things. If this would happen, if that could happen. I see Mary writing on bits of paper in our house because she's planning to do some stuff to our house that I know I'm going to have to pay for. The trouble is she's been in hospital, so now she's all this time to daydream and imagine stuff. We're keeping her busy. Before it was better. But so what do you talk about? What do you imagine? What do you daydream about? Is it maybe promotion? Is it maybe a new job? Is it maybe how you can help your neighbor down the street and think, well, I would love to help that family, but I don't want to insult them. I don't want them to think they're a charity case. You know, we think all these things. The enemy puts all these thoughts in our mind. But what do we talk about? What do we imagine? What do we daydream about? Because there's a good chance if it's positive and it's serving and helping people, it's God that's causing you to think that way. Last one. What makes you angry? What makes you sad? When you see injustice, does that make you angry? When you see kids that don't have enough, does that make you sad? Well, then, how can you serve into that? Maybe going on a mission trip to India, maybe helping with the food bank, maybe helping a neighbor. Again, we have to do something about it. It's not just enough having the feeling, having the passion. We need to lay down the staff. We need to pour out the oil. We need to allow the passion of our heart to become a plan in our head that we can help that situation. You see, even there are situations that we can serve into anonymously. You see, if you think, I don't know how that person would respond to that, we can serve into it anonymously. We can do it in a way, we can plan a way to be able to bless people without them even knowing. That's not good for the ego, but it's God. Because God, they don't need to know it's us. And so what makes you angry? What makes you sad? What are you going to do about it? How are we going to take it to the next stage? And so that's what we're going to talk about next week. Maybe the band will come. Next time we're going to talk about how. How is some of this stuff going to work out for us? We have seen, and as we were saying on Tuesday nights, some of the heroes of faith were just ordinary folk that stepped out, that put some of these principles into practice, and they ended up becoming amazing, amazing men and women of God, serving God in their generation. And we want to be some of those people, don't we? Amen. Let's stand together.